the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are phenomenal documents. I mean, we've got 237 years under them. So under that, we've become the most prosperous nation in the world, the most creative nation in the world, the most stable nation in the world. And other nations thought, we'll just copy that. And so if you look between 1797 and 1800, there were 15 nations in Europe that copied our Constitution Declaration. None of them lasted more than 4 years. Then you look from 1800 on, and all across South America and Central America, dozens of nations copied our Constitution Declaration. None of them survived. You look at Liberia. Liberia copied the Constitution, even our economics. They used the U.S. dollar for their exchange. Didn't survive. How come? The words are all right, because they didn't have the principles. What happened was the Americans had a certain set of principles in their heart, and because they did, and because the citizenry was educated in certain principles, didn't matter who got in office, the principles guided. We're getting to the point now where we know those principles less, and therefore it's easier to move us in different directions that we've never moved before, into things we've never done. I mean, quite frankly, right now, we have never in the history of 400 years of the United States had the attacks on religious conscience that we have right now. We've never had the attacks on the right to keep and bear arms that we have right now, because we understood that those were God-given principles that came out of the Bible. I don't care what party you're from. God's the one who said these, so we never fought about them. Now we fight about them because we don't know what God said. We don't know what the principles are. And in the case of the Declaration, they started, hey, we believe there's a Creator. Government believes that. We believe the Creator gives certain guaranteed rights that government can't touch. We believe there are certain fixed morals, there are rights and wrongs, the laws of nature, nature's God, that nobody can alter. We believe that government exists to protect our inalienable rights. We believe that below inalienable rights in the moral law, we run it by the consent of the governed. And we believe that if the government didn't do those first 5 things, we can change our government. Right. Those were 6 principles that everybody agreed on. And nobody from any party, and we've had dozens of parties in America's political history, nobody was willing to take on those 6 principles and deny them. And that's why you go back to Jefferson, hey, we got lots of differences of opinion, but those principles.
Wow. When did the principles start to change into this debate over opinions?
The principles started to change as a couple things happened, and it literally goes back to the hands of we, the religious people in America, the Bible-believing people. We went to an epoch in about 1879 where the church really split, denomination split. And at that point in time, we had about half the church that said, you know what, I don't know about this politics and government and science and law, and I don't care about that. People need to know Jesus. I'm going to get them saved. And so they became the evangelicals. The other remained the fundamentalists. The Bible's fundamental. We've now taken about half the Christians out of the process. Then we go through 3 major political setbacks in the 19-teens and 1920s. And starting in about 1925 and 30, you'll find in writings that churches start saying, kids, you want to do something good for God? Be a pastor. Be a missionary. Stay out of secular stuff. Don't get in journalism. Don't get in law. Don't get in entertainment. Don't get in media. Don't get in government. And so suddenly, there's really, I look at 5 major cultural centers in any nation that directs what that nation will be. Sometimes they're called the 7 mountains. Other people call them 7. Whatever they are, you got business, you got education, you got government, you got media, you got pulpit. Those 5 things, if you lose control of them, those 5 things will determine where any nation goes. And we got out of all 5 of those. Yeah. We've bailed out of all 5. We got out of media, we got out of education, we got out of entertainment, we got out of government, and we've given up the pulpit. Yep. We've gotten out of all 5. And so now we're fighting wars we've never had to fight before. Because back at that point in time, I mean, if you'll read speeches of presidents, whether it's Ronald Reagan or Calvin Coolidge or other presidents, they're more evangelical than what I hear in most pulpits today. Mm-hmm. And that was our civil leaders, because we had that common value system. We had a common basis of respect for God, respect for inalienable rights that He gave, limitations on government, because God drew the lines about what government could do. But as you lose that cognizance of what God wants, then government thinks it is everything. And it can draw any lines it wants. It can make any rules it wants. It can define any process it wants. And now we're fighting processes we've never had to fight before because we lost control of principles. So it's really been something over the last 50 to 60 years where we've really given it up. But it was God-fearing people who gave it up and said, we refuse to play. We're taking our ball and going home. Somebody else took over the sandbox, and now we're trying to get back in it.
So tell the people a little about what exactly the Center for Self-Governance does. I mean, first off, you teach them about the even concepts, and the language. We talked earlier that there's been a theft of language.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's a war over language. So talk a little about that, if you will.
Well, we noticed from reading the inaugural addresses of the presidents, starting around the 1870s, that even the president's language started to change. They started using different terminology that the founders were using. George Washington, the sacred fire of liberty, the destiny of the Republican model of government are staked on the experiment and trusted into the hands of the American people. That's one of those principles that you described earlier, is entrusted into the hands of the American people. But the language started changing in the 1870s, we noticed, and you were bringing up how the principles started to be changed. So language is from our experimentation, is huge. Rules, laws are full of language. They're the words, right, that we were told by a former speaker of the Congress, that we have to pass it to find out what's in it. What's it full of? It's full of language, full of words, 2,700 pages of language. So from our perspective, we want to teach the average citizen this language of self-governance. So somebody referred to our training program as linguistics training in self-governance. But mainly it's understanding what self-governance is from the perspective of those who gave us this great gift. They defined it as self-determination to control instituted government. You were describing that earlier, David. It's the determination, it's the personal determination to be participants in civil government. Secondly, what is centralized governance? Is this some evil beast? No, it became evil because we abdicated our participation as citizens within the country. Secondly is, what's the distinction between power and governance? There's a huge distinction between the two. I noticed Jefferson wrote to William Jarvis, he said, "I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves." And so you end up with all the state constitutions, except for California, that say all political power is inherent in the people. So you have this, the founders spoke the same language. They spoke with one voice. It's amazing to me. Ben Franklin had an exchange with a woman right after the Constitutional Convention, where Dr. James McHenry writes in his diary about this woman, Elizabeth Powell. "So, doctor, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic?" And it's fascinating, the founders' response is, it's a republic if you can keep it.
That's right.
She had no political rights. Yeah. So how is she supposed to keep it? So there's like all this secret, well, not secret, it's just open language, but we just lost the interpretation of what they were saying. Yeah. So we teach our citizens, we teach our students who decide to take our training program. Number one is how to inform the discretion of their fellow citizens. What does that look like? Number two, how to instruct delegated authority. Many of the state constitutions later on in their Article 1s talk about citizens having the right to instruct their representatives. And then finally, what does controlling instituted government look like? Yep. Ezra Taft Benson said that since man was created by God and man created government, then man should remain master over it. What does that look like? We've lost what that looks like. And so our training program spends a lot of time in the first level kind of dealing with the mind-forged manacles that are in the citizens' minds today that have been laid over the last 100+ years.
I got to emphasize, mind-forged manacles.
Talk about it. Let's talk about it.
They're manacles we put on ourselves by our mind.
Yes.
And I'll just give one, because I'm so ticked off over this.
This is so good.
Pastors and churches think they can't talk about political things in the pulpit because of the 501c. That is self-censorship. The IRS has no authority over what goes on in the pulpit of church. We've had a lawsuit sitting out there. We've tried thousands of times to get the IRS to bite on this lawsuit because we keep intentionally crossing the line with pastors where they're saying all sorts of things they're not supposed to. And the IRS knows, like we know, that that is the manacles of the mind, and they want people to self-censor, and that's such a good phrase.
Who's in control of whom? And most citizens don't understand this. It's Ezra Taft Benson's quote, who's in control of whom? Who's the master over the creature? Who's in the relationship between the citizens of this great nation? Who's in control of whom? And we have, I mean, I'm talking to myself here, I have put mind-forged manacles on myself up until I was 38, 39, 40, and then until I met my great teammates in the state of Tennessee, and we started asking the questions, well, how do we keep our republic? We don't have to wait for the next elected official to keep the republic. Its republic belongs to Mrs. Powell. It's a republic if you can keep it. So our goal with our training program is to explore together as students, not just, I don't feel like an expert. I feel like someone who wants to join with my fellow citizens in exploring and discussing and in the sandbox, figuring out how to keep the republic.
And I'll jump on that too, because what these guys, what they do at the Center for Self-Governance, it goes back to Proverbs 23:7. It says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And if I'm convinced that, I can't make a difference and I don't know how to do this and I'm an amateur and they won't listen to me, and as long as we're going to keep thinking like that, we're not going to do anything. But if you get a little bit of training, it's dangerous what you can do. I mean, it is really impressive what a person can do when they change their mindset about what they can do and stop limiting themselves. The mind manacles again. You get out of that, and that's where this training is so effective and so good.
Yeah.